I think we should start now, and then people will join.
Yeah.
You start. Keep your video on.
Atul Bhai is on mute.
No, but Janki is to start first. Janki.
Okay. So shall we start?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this today's event. It's an online today's event, which is an online virtual dialogue that we are looking at to discuss the sustainable textile traditions and how do we take the Indian handloom tradition learnings into the sustainable textile aspect. So welcome to this dialogue today. We have just a brief introduction to the event and the program. Center for Environment Education, in collaboration with United Nations Environment Program, is organizing today's event. CE, Center for Environment Education, was established in 1984 by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change as a Center of Excellence in Environment Education. And we have been working across several thematic areas such as biodiversity, water, rural livelihoods, urban transports, and several others. We have been as part of several projects. We have always been partnering with United Nations Environment Program, India office and across, and we have done several programs together. This one is a part of, India is a rich textile heritage. In fact, the country was known. So this whole project began with documenting the Indian textile traditions. Some of these are, very in vogue today. Also, some of this may not have been that prevalent in today's time, but they do provide excellent kind of opportunities to understand and look into the textiles in today's context, how they are connected with the social, cultural, and environmental aspects. So the whole project is about documenting the such textile traditions, especially the traditions which are like specifically talking of handloom traditions of India, pan-India, starting from, which captures the diversity, starting from northeast up to all the way to the down, and starting from northern Himalayas to the western Gujarat and Rajasthan. So trying to and capture its vivid diversity, but looking at this diversity not only from the crafts perspective, but looking at from the perspective of sustainability, environmental sustainability, cultural and social sustainability. So that is the whole project. As part of this project, this documentation is being prepared. Today's dialogue is basically trying to connect and explore this link with leading experts and designers from the sustainable fashion sector. I would briefly introduce our today's speakers and then hand it over to them for the further deliberations and taking you further. So we have with us Shri Atul Bagai. He is the country head for United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, India office. UNEP, as all of you must be knowing, it's a leading global environmental body which has sets the environment agenda and supports through its various programs and projects implementation of such programs. So Mr. Bagai has been actively leading this UNEP country office, and he has worked on various aspects like climate change, chemicals, waste and air quality, environmental governance, resource efficiency, so all host of programs on which UNEP works. And previously to join the UNEP, Mr. Bagai has been as a civil career as a civil servant. He rose to the director ozone in MOEFCC, the Government of India, before joining UNEP in 2000. And he has worked on very senior positions in the state of Uttar Pradesh and the central government. And as a UN veteran, he has spent over 2 decades spearheading the challenging assignments in the regions across South and Southeast Asia and Pacific Islands. So welcome you, Mr. Atul Bagai, to this event. Mr. Karthikey Sarabhai, he is the founding director of Center for Environment Education. He is a leading environment educator, and he has been working across the sector since many years now. In 2000, he was since his establishment in 1984. He has
Janki,
been
let's give a short one. And Janki, let's just give a very short introduction. Otherwise, there are people here who have such long histories that we will take up all the time. So I think just a very short thing, and then let us all start. Otherwise, it will just get
perfect. So, and he has, Karthikey Bhai has been associated with several other international bodies such as UNESCO and working in this sector. What I was suggesting is we have with us Ms. Ritu Sethi, Professor Ashok Chatterjee, Ms. Pavitra Mudaya, Ms. Payal Jain. They all are the leading, and Ms. Juhi Pandey. What I was suggesting is, as we begin with the today's today's program, we are looking forward to hear to start the context and start with Mr. Atul Bagai and from your addresses, and then we'll move towards the panel discussion. As we move towards the panel discussion, I'll take a little longer to introduce each panelist as they begin their session. So, as a fine, may I request Atul Bagai sir to kindly kind of initiate, or Sir Karthikey Bhai sir, if you want to say something.
I think let Atulji start.
Yes, please. So can I request Atul Bagai sir to please deliberate upon basically focusing on the circularity in the textile value chain and what are the global concern and about this whole initiative of UNEP. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Janki ji. And I would like to, on behalf of UNEP, welcome this very esteemed panel, which has been brought together, and in front of such stalwarts which we have, I wonder what is that value addition I can bring in, where I am not a textile specialist, but certainly a big textile fan and a big textile lover. So I just thought, what is it that I can bring on the table? Also, especially from the fact that as we are organizing this today, there are also very intense negotiations going on in Sharm el-Sheikh on climate change. And certainly textiles is a very critical and important part of those negotiations. I also understand some very focused global side events are also being organized by various international organizations connected with sustainable clothing. These side events are being organized at Sharm el-Sheikh, which also brings in the focus on how we need to move towards sustainable fashion or sustainable textiles and bring in sustainability in this sector on the whole. I will not go into the details of what is the carbon footprint of this sector, because this is something that is pretty well known. But it is certain that while we have a very long way to go for fashion being sustainable, the global community, and especially in India, we are certainly taking some very important steps that would facilitate this transition. Of course, educating consumers and engaging with them to shift mindsets towards a more sustainable lifestyles is a critical need. And I would specifically like to mention here the LIFE program that the Prime Minister launched on 20th October at Kevadia, along with the Secretary General. And this LIFE program, LIFE for Environment, which is a global program that India has launched to show its leadership, is based on 6 verticals. And I would like to say and inform that textiles is certainly one of the 6 verticals which is being looked at in terms of including in this campaign. In fact, yesterday only we had an event at the India Pavilion in Sharm el-Sheikh, which was presided over by the Honorable Union Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change. our executive director and the assistant administrator of UNDP were there, and so was the deputy executive secretary of the UNFCCC secretariat. And I think while they were talking of what individual action can be taken to mitigate climate change, there was certainly references to what an individual can do when it comes to textiles or fashion in terms of taking positive for mitigating the carbon footprint of this very, very important sector. It is also very clear that while Life campaign and making people aware of sustainability is a very good effort, but this in itself is not sufficient. A wider enabling environment is so very critical to ensure that sustainability is a viable and easily accessible option for consumers. And there's a lot of discussion going on, a lot of debate going on, whether the government should just focus on individual consumer behavior, or is there no need for kind of a environment around or an atmosphere around such individual behavior, which is backed by industry effort and backed by policy support. And certainly these two are very, very important element, which also showcases that action by all stakeholders, whether they're government or industry or consumers, is a very, very critical part of work that we all need to do. In fact, UNEP released a study last year on sustainability and circularity in the textile value chain, global stock taking, that talks a lot about circularity. We're also working in Angul district in Odisha, where we are developing a circular economy strategy for a district, a first of its kind. And we certainly are looking at textile also as one of the sectors to look at. The panel, which is so esteemed, has been closely involved with the work that we are all doing in the area of textiles. I will not dwell too much on that because you all know about the work, but I will certainly like to mention that the work that we are doing with all of you on documenting the environmental and social sustainability aspects of a rich handloom tradition is a very unique work that needs to be highlighted over the next few years to draw from that the unique and important parts of the textile value chain in the country that are implementing this whole sustainability element despite the kind of modernization that has taken place in the sector over the last 50 years. And you all are analyzing about 100 traditions, including micro case studies. And I think this will be a very important work that needs to be really looked at and outreached. And we are really looking forward to a very robust kind of a work that should come out. In fact, I was at the Norwegian embassy day before yesterday, where they were showcasing a very unique digitizing the archives of India, a plan that has been taken up by a very big company in Norway, where they are, with the archaeological survey, they have digitized on a pilot basis 3 World Heritage sites, and they will preserve that for the next 1,000 years in the snow mountains in Arctic. A very, very exciting project that they were doing. And I had discussions with the managing director and then subsequently with UNESCO day before yesterday. And this is where we will come back to all of you, where I suggested that we should also look at not only the archaeological heritage, but also our intangible heritage and also our nature or natural heritage to document. And there is a lot of interest where they are very keen to digitize and preserve the sustainable textile traditions in India for posterity. And I think this book that CE is doing under Karthikeya Bhai's leadership is something that can form a basis of archiving this tradition, which is being transferred orally from generations to generations. I'm really excited with this conversation today. I'm looking forward to the very esteemed panel we have and for some very good discussions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Atulji. I'm like you also looking forward to listening more than saying something because of the quality of the panel we have and everyone else. Let me just say I am at Sharm el Sheikh, Atulji, and part of this whole concern which is going. But just before that, on the Sunday, I got to go to see some of the museums and the pyramids here. And I was just thinking how that traditions of Egypt and so many other civilizations had come to an end. And now you see them in history, you see them as documents, while the Indian tradition has survived. And so many things you see are probably not changed, whether it's in agriculture or textiles or something. And we have these as living traditions. And I think that is something we must realize is something quite unique to India, that these traditions are living. They modified themselves and changed themselves, but they are there. As you rightly said, Atulji, that the Prime Minister has stressed traditions and learnings from that. And in 2015, we did this book called Parampara at his behest to share with others. And that's when India saw that in the climate change, for the first time, the word lifestyles got into the document, in the preamble of the Paris Agreement, which was something which was resisted all these years by several countries, that you cannot mix it lifestyle, but it is a issue of lifestyle. And textiles, as you rightly said, is such a key part of that whole tradition of sustainability and what you do further. So when we looked at how our traditions are placed, and we'll learn more about it today, they were very much part of an ecosystem which exists. None of these traditions or lifestyles exist in isolation. They were all very much connected. For instance, connection with the biodiversity which was around. And we have worked, Jui has also been with us in that, working in Kutch, for instance, in Khamir, and realized that suddenly a plant from which they made a particular dye disappears in the wild, and you then replace it with a chemical or something else because you don't have that. Now, unless whoever works in those plants also gets that done, it does not wait. Now, the minute you change a particular dye, you find that your water, which was otherwise not polluting, starts looking as pollution. And in that case, people will argue that, look, is this really a sustainable tradition? So I think we need to understand each of the traditions as part of an ecosystem. The ecosystem also involves several groups or several communities working with each other, because this is so unique and so wonderful about the weave of Indian culture, if you like, that we were working on the eastern coast, looking at the tsunami and afterwards. And one realizes how you cannot just work with the fishermen, because the fishermen are so intricately connected with a whole lot of other communities, which are all affected. And it just shows how wonderful the quality of India really is. As Janki mentioned earlier, we were looking at different aspects of this. We were looking at certainly waste. And when we work with school children, we often just ask them that, what is the one thing in nature you don't find? And very few can come up with the fact that there is no waste in a forest. The whole ecosystem, it's nice that we come up with words like circularity and all that, but nature has really done it for forever. And it's a learning which we need. We are talking about biodiversity. We are talking about water. We are talking about energy and how that is used. But very importantly, how the sector itself, which embodies a certain decentralization, a certain control of people, can be. I mean, we're using words like working from home now for post-COVID, but I mean, a lot of this work was done from home, and as a result, women could work very easily because they could do it along with along with other duties which they might have had. So there are so many aspects of that sustainability, and we really look forward to listening to this panel discuss that. We are particularly interested at UNEP in taking this whole discussion to all the students who are joining in various institutions connected with textiles. And I hope that this not only are the people who are seeing it today or through the tube, but also people will use this as a resource for several discussions. I've known, and many of you have participated in these discussions with students, and there is increasing interest that the word environment is not something to do with environmental science or some other discipline in science, but it is really to do with all of them. And textiles is a very key component of that. So without much more, I'm welcoming you on behalf of us and thanking UNEP and Atulji for this wonderful opportunity to work on this. I hope that our work in terms of the publication and what we are doing with the Craft Museum will take this whole discussion a little further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karthik bhai. Thank you so much for your kind words and this initial introduction of the work that we are doing and the document that we are working on, and how this ecosystem approach is what we are looking at when we are looking at the Indian textile traditions. So moving forward to our panelists, now we have with us Ms. Juhi Pandey. Juhi ji has been in this design sector for more than 2 decades, but initially after working with the mainstream fashion, she actually then focused more on how the art and design can be human centric, and it can be used as a way to uplift and involve the various socio-economical sectors and artisans across the country. She has worked with various NGOs and has been part of facilitating an organization itself in Goa, which is called Tara Trust, and they work for children and women from migrant communities. She has been actively involved with as a director of Khamir in Kutch, and where they have worked on basically using the systems and process-based approaches. And currently, she is with in Meghalaya, Shillong, working towards setting up a center of excellence for Khadi for the Northeast, which is a collaborative project between the National Institute of Fashion Technology and Ministry of Small and Medium Enterprises. So without taking much time, Juiji, may I please welcome you and hand it over to you to discuss about how you see handlooms as a way of socio-economic transformation. Over to you, Juiji.
Thank you, Janki, and namaste to everyone. And thank you, Karthik bhai, for setting the tone about what I thought I would discuss today. So to begin with, when we started discussion on handloom, the visual that comes into everybody's mind are fabrics, are varied formats of textiles. And you think about a sari, you think about a stole. But to maintain that so-called living tradition, it's very important for us to start looking at the back end. And I think this was, for me, a journey that began with my life in Kutch and with Khamir, where the idea of the material, which comes, is a very, very strong aspect of what our handloom traditions are all about. And without the material and where it comes from and its basis, there won't be this living tradition that we all are speaking about. And it's through the journey of the last 7 odd years that now what I look at and work with and want to bring to the, to a forum of this sort is the aspect of look at the back end of the value chain and look at where the material resources come, because that has not only a social impact, but a huge ecological impact as well as we move forward to trying to build these circular economy, sustainable lifestyles, whatever we want to move into further in terms of a way of work or way of living. If I can share screen, what is it possible? Shall I just
Yes, please.
click on this, Janki? Okay. So just maybe it's better to work with certain visuals. So I have a short presentation, which, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So here, what I've tried to do is basically explain one of the very basic value chains of how our entire craft or handloom tradition actually works and the number of players that are involved in this entire process. And they're all interdependent, not only for the practice that they are all involved in this value chain, but they're also interdependent in terms of their lifestyle, because traditionally there was exchange of knowledge, there was exchange of material, exchange of space that helped us create any of our crafts and any of our textiles that we are speaking about. And it's this balanced, interdependent value chain that also, even today, has helped us to keep these living traditions alive. So one of the key factors that work with us and will not allow for this chain to completely be full or continuous is the farmer and the pastoralist, is where we get what we know as our natural resource or material, which we take forward into making our textiles. So there won't be a spinner around if we didn't have the fiber. There won't be a weaver around if we didn't have the fiber. There won't be a printing or dyeing or a darzi or a tailoring or stitching tradition alive if we didn't have the farmer and the fiber. And so it's very key that if we want to keep this aspect of continuing a sustainable or a robust handloom tradition alive today, the need for us to go back and evaluate where are our materials coming from, where is the fiber coming from, where's the dye coming from. That's a separate topic altogether, which I haven't tried to touch here. Is important to come into all our dialogues when we are speaking about textiles, textile traditions, handloom traditions, printing, spinning traditions. And it is all inbred, and all of us know it. And this is just a slide I've added, that there is a whole aspect of and history that exists with us that tells us that all our textile traditions were inbred in our natural resources. It was inbred in our organic fibers. And some of them have now just remain as museum pieces, but it does give us that much of a linkage to tell us where we are coming from and where we could continue to be in a certain format. And, there are our farmers and our tribals. And when we were talking about nature and how we need to really work with nature in any of our practices moving forward, we also need to, give equal importance to the people who live off the land. One, of course, are our farmers, but the other are also our tribals. Like now, when I've moved to the northeast from the western part of India, I see that if the forests, if the jungles, if the water of these regions are still intact, is because the tribal communities of the northeast are still very, very inbred and live very close to their land. All their practices, cultural practices, religious practices, have a huge, huge relationship with their land, with nature. And hence, for them to protect and preserve it is far more important than just use it. And that's the aspect that we need to start also working towards and thinking towards when we have dialogues in the textile space or in the handloom space. And the other third key component or player for nature are our pastoralists. There's a huge, like, it's almost, for me, it was learning being on the ground with these communities, where it was a fiber, wool as a primary fiber across many regions of our country, which has completely been taken off in maybe because of mass production, the advent of popular fashion, which also started creeping into their own communities who have lived with these particular traditional practices, that we forgot how vast the contribution of our pastoral community was, not only as wool as a fiber for textiles, but even with their livestock moving from space to space, nurturing our soil and our land for our farmers. And hence, this cycle, when broken because of boundaries being created, most of land getting converted into industrial land or living land or infrastructure development, etc., are reducing the interaction that our pastoralists have had with the land and across, taking even knowledge across because of the movement that they used to cause. So as much as if we want to celebrate nature, we need to also celebrate the people who live off this land, to be able to see how it is because of their key contribution to the value chain is why we still have a living tradition with us and carries on with us. And these traditions were not only in terms of a utilitarian value, but there was an aesthetic value, there was an identity value that also was created because of these specific materials coming from an area, coming from a region, being utilized by them for their own needs, as well as to create a certain level of identity and space in the larger section of society. So here again, I'm speaking specifically about certain fibers that I think there's no dialogue happening of them at all. And they're very, very important fibers for us to look at. And I've specifically mentioned khadi here because it's become a term that all of us have to be very careful about using, but our entire value chain and our entire textile traditional processes was completely hand. And there was a huge amount of contribution of our spinners in it, which somewhere in the advent of industrialization was lost because you wanted easy material to reach. And we started thinking of the final product, which is the textile being the most important in the whole value chain. And hence, how do you bring the product out into the market, which was our next important space, is where we start creating shortcuts in our traditional value chains and saying, okay, here, let's just give industrial yarn to the weaver and he'll weave it on his handloom, or she'll weave it on her handloom, and we have the product for the market. But breaking these linkages also created those ecological imbalances at the back end, where once the desi wool started having no value, the sheep herders and the pastoralists stopped breeding those kind of breeds, and they moved towards breeding breeds which were more so-called for the meat market, which meant eventually you were even decreasing the genealogy of the entire breed of sheep. And a lot of them are going to be lost today because we've just almost played with nature. And hence, these are aspects that if we continue to work towards just looking at mass production, industrialization of these so-called, not so-called, but these hand traditions, we may just somewhere lose out on a lot of our ecological value that we've had, which have also helped in creating a certain level of balance in our climate, in our water, in our land moving forward. So another very important fiber that we don't talk about that much is silk. This is again a very, very important protein fiber that's available and was nurtured in abundance at one point of time in certain regions of our country. The last 10 months I have spent in understanding the eri silk fiber, which is actually the primary fiber of the northeast of India, and coming to realization again that some of these fibers, either they've been just given a very high pedestal of being luxury and not reachable, or just not being spoken about. Eri silk being one of them. Eri silk almost grew everywhere across the Northeast. And the beauty of the entire story is, which again, many of you may know, many of you may not, I got to know it only once I've started living there, was that actually the Eri silk worm was reared for the worm, which is a high part of the high protein diet of the tribals. And the fiber was a byproduct which was eventually spun into yarn and woven into textiles. And this is across most of the states of the Northeast. But coming off the industrial aspect of bringing in cotton and just spreading cotton across every part of our country, this particular fiber has almost become, again, something which we've put into the luxury category, whereas it was an everyday fabric. It was almost like the poor man's silk, as much as, if you want to call it, which was important for us to know. And these have been woven in India for centuries, and we don't talk about it. We don't talk about this fiber. And we need to look at, how do we bring these dialogues into the larger aspect of our textile working system, of our handloom working system, because these remain one in terms of an identity, but they have a very strong ecological connect to our entire value chain of textiles, which needs to be addressed in a very serious manner. There are other fibers like nettle in the northeast eastern states as well, which doesn't even come into the foray of the larger market or even say the niche market anymore. There are designers today who are trying to work with these processes. There's a huge number of traditional artisans who knew about the processing, who knew about the spinning and weaving of these kind of fibers, which needs to also be looked at more intently. And these all create almost a unique identity, which all of us from a marketing term say, what's the USP? What's the USP? These traditional natural fibers easily available in our environment, in our ecosystem, actually don't need to be worked much with, and will give you that USP that you're requiring. It may be, the scales may be less, but that's fine. The material variety is very large. So we can, if we can't mass produce something, it's okay, because instead of mass producing everything with one particular type of fiber, here we are trying to create our textiles with all the variety of varied fibers that are available within our individual ecosystems and create that uniqueness and identity and USP. So it's about trying to really work in a space where we can actually leverage our natural resources, these natural fibers, natural dyes, to create a certain space for our textile traditions. And we know it's possible. And the best working model has been Khamir, where the coming of Kala cotton completely changed the entire scenario of the textile tradition and the weaving community, as well as the farming community out there, who actually weren't very proud of growing Kala cotton till it wasn't brought into the mainstream and into textile production. But once it did, they also realized how much of it was of value. We've worked with the Desi Oon, or the local indigenous wool value chain, where we very consciously said that we will first work with our spinners, because that was a huge gap that had been created where we were losing our hand spinning tradition completely. But we needed a fiber that would be supported only with hand spinning. And that's the local indigenous wool was what we found. And hence now that particular value chain across the last 4 to 5 years has, sorry, I think Pavitra needs to mute her speaker. Okay, sorry. So I'll stop here anyway, and just end with the fact that in our entire textile traditional value chain, and over the time and the last two and a half decades of me also being a design student and then moving to become a design practitioner and now working specifically in the community space, we need to start very intently and consciously having these conversations on the fiber, on the dye, more consciously, because these particular practices can only be sustained forward if the back end also is created in that uniqueness. Else, once we lose out on our natural resources that create some of our beautiful textiles in our country, or create some of the beautiful dyes that we have for our textiles, we'll almost be creating a very homogeneous environment moving forward. And everyone will only be able to discuss it as historical textiles over a period of time. And there's a possibility some of it may reach that stage, but we still have the capacity, and we still have the farmers, the tribals, and the pastoralists who've got this knowledge still with them. And we can leverage it to create a new dimension and a new space almost for our textile traditions moving forward, which will, in that process, also keep our handlooms sustained and our handlooms rich and alive for the future. I think I will stop here, Janki, and maybe we can continue the conversation. I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joyji, for this very interesting perspective on the handloom traditions, looking at the materials, starting from that base, and how does that impact the entire community and the socio-ecological aspects of the entire value chain, and how does that can serve as a way of looking at reviving the handloom traditions. May I now, there are some opportunities. This is especially for the participants. Please put your question and answers in the chat box or Q&A box, and we have a dedicated space after we listen to all the panelists to discuss the question and answers. So please putting your questions there. And may I now invite our next panelist, Ms. Pavitra Mudayaji. Pavitra Mudayaji has been working with handloom sector for more than 48 years, and she is working with Vimor. It's a home store that was started on the handloom with her mother, and it has impacted hundreds of weavers where she directly involves them. Design development, documentation of oral history, traditional designs and techniques of heritage handloom is her primary passion. She is managing trustee of Vimor Handloom Foundation, and she's also started the Vimor Museum of Living Textiles. And the foundation works on skilling and supporting weavers, and they're actively involved in various ways in engaging the artisans and scaling them. So over to you, Pavitra ji, for your discussions on how you look at inspirations from these traditions to create sustainable fashion and design. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Janaki. Yeah. Jui spoken so well, and both the speakers, both Atul and Karthik, have spoken everything. I don't know what else I'm going to say. But of course, for me, I have a slightly different take on it, because I believe, apart from what Juhi has said, I think livelihood is very important, because unless you put food on the table, anything else pales in comparison, because they don't live at the standards we live, in spite of so much of diverse craft and skills, everything. The bottom line is, my work is saying, how can I use a design to put food on the table? And when we start with that as the basic thing, we want to also protect our cultural textile heritage. So along with that, these are the two things that sort of really push me to do things. And it has worked in a lot of ways, because I don't have ownership of anybody's loom. I don't have a shed. I don't have anybody under me. So my model has been, okay, take a textile, look at it, be inspired. You don't need to create an exact replica, because your brain is different from the person who's created it 100 years ago. But give that opportunity to use it as an inspiration, and then develop your own ways of making a commercially viable, marketable product. And I think simple aesthetics and simple design interventions without too much of investment is my main success, I can say. Today, everyone does elaborate designs with a lot of jacquards, and introductions of all that. But while studying the old textiles and studying the processes, as she says, about the material and about the loom, it's so inclusive that it's unbelievable, because every time a sari is woven, at least there are directly 12 people who get impacted, whether it's the farmer.
Vikraji, you have
You got muted.
Vikraji, you got muted.
Okay. No, even in the loom itself, they use jawar stems. Okay. After the plant, jawar stem is used to make the reeds. Street sizing, they use a brush with old roots or with vetiver roots. So again, it has a whole thing, and it's tied with all torn rags, literally. So nothing is wasted. All old fabric is made into kaudi, that is a quilt. So at every level, you will find there is nothing wasted. And even the looms, they use local trees like the honge and the jackfruit, and rafters from old houses that have been going. You know, they use those rafters to build, to make the looms. So at every part of it, they have sort of looked at how we will sustain. And these reeds will never be harsh on silk. So that's why we have a longevity of almost 100 years a silk sari lasts, because it goes through these jawar reeds. Today, we have everything by steel, and everything is so semi-automatic, mechanized. It takes away a lot of livelihoods, you know. That is one aspect I'd like to discuss. And so when we start training a weaver, we start with simple things. All I need to know is that he wants to do well, and that if he's got that fire, definitely we will support him and build it up. So it starts with just basically 2 lines slowly. From the time he starts with just 2 lines, it should be saleable, till he slowly develops his skill. With our mentorship is there, and we give an advance and we give a buyback. So he's working in a no risk environment. See, all these terms I'm putting it in now. All these years I didn't realize it, but he's learning at my cost. If it's a community, I give the last 3 designs for them to design. And if it is a first piece is a defective piece, again, we absorb it, because then how else will he grow? I mean, he doesn't need to invest for him to develop and to grow. So the onus comes to us, and I mean, it's a small price to pay. And that's how I think we've built up a relationship with the weavers, that today I can say proudly 80% of them can buy me out, and without having any ownership on them. And they bring their sons to me, all computer literate boys. And I don't know what I really teach, but it is something to do with design and color in very simple ways. And I think they have technology with them, so they can build their business and scale it up to huge successful levels. The other aspect I'd like to talk is, even I've been working with the Kambli people, the pastoral community. And what was amazing is they work with the Dakhini wool here. And everyone comes to me saying, support me. So I'm a small organization, but then I use design thinking to be able to do that. So with the pastoralists, I've been using recycled silk in a big way with them, and the products have come out beautifully. That's another reason I've been using a lot of waste. Bangalore had a waste market. So whenever I did training in the rural areas, I used to go to the waste market and pick up things. I mean, that time there was no understanding of sustainability years ago. But it was, how do I keep the cost down for the weaver? Because he has to support himself without me. I don't want to be holding him for many years. So either my design, I give it away free after a year, because we sell it at Wimore, and then I give it to him. And then the support these kind of issues. So, sorry, just 1 minute. Yeah. In waste, we have used a lot of work, and it is amazing the kind of texture structures that we are able to do. So, and it's easy because you don't need much input in it. And it's not that they have to do it only traditionally. So by working with all these new material, it gives you a lot of chance to contemporize things, to see what the market wants, and to see how sustainable recycled waste is. Silk waste is something I worked with a lot, and even cotton waste and different kinds of permutations. And it excites the weaver because he's not doing the same thing that was done 100 years ago. I think it's very necessary for us to allow change and to allow that growth, because it has to have a reinterpretation. We cannot always go on by what was there. I mean, the technique is theirs, everything is theirs, but I think we have to allow that kind of creative growth. So as I say, I always allow them, saying, I have done this, reinterpret what I have done according to how you think it is. And it has always produced results. And in a way, you also feel part of a larger picture because you're preserving your cultural heritage. And in my museum, I'd like to just say something, that we don't have any royal textiles because I was never a collector, but it's everybody's grandmother's sari that is there. So it becomes a thing to study and then show it to the weavers. We have a couple of looms, they come and try it out, and then they tell me their little stories to it. So it is, my museum, I say, celebrate our commonality instead of our differences. And textiles all across the world, you would find something common. Like our Gandaberanda, that's the Karnataka emblem, is also a Russian emblem. I mean, it's unbelievable when we look at common things that we have across the world, when there was no transportation and no communication. So I think this is the way I have been working. And the biggest thing is they have, the weavers are an amazing community, because I think anybody who works with their hand, heart and head creates magic. They are people who are so honest, integrity. They have all the beautiful human emotions that we talk about, which is very rare to find in an urban area. But you'll never find them outright cheat you. In all these years, we've just had one bounce check, one weaver who's tried to cheat me. In 49 years, that is something to say about weavers. They have that innate integrity. I think, thank you. Yeah. Hello. Hello. Yeah, I think I'm done.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think this was something very interesting aspect, how the entire weaving process is embedded in the local resources which are available there, whether it's in form of a grass, whether it's a form of some waste material that is lying there, and how the skills help them in converting the available material into beautiful products. Also the aspect that how the innovations and creativity with sustainability aspect intact can help in creating some bring viewers a fresh perspective and keep them inspired to do things. So thank you so much for these words. And now may I move towards once again, before I go to the next speaker, to the participants, if there are any questions that you want to ask to any of the panelists, please put them in Q&A box. And once we have the deliberations, we would be taking a question answer session. Thank you so much. Now moving towards
Janki, just sorry
yes,
for
yes,
interruption.
please.
Just two things. I think if everyone can mute, only the speaker should put it on, because I think there's a lot of disturbance going on on some of the mics. And also, I think Ashokji has put up a very pertinent point that we should all keep an eye on the watch, in the clock, so that we are able to also have some healthy discussions.
Sure. Yes. Thank you so much for. Ms. Payal Jain she's a leading fashion designer and associated with Fashion Design Council of India for more than 12 years. And she has been actively involved in revival of handicrafts and working on traditional designs and how to mainstream them. And so without taking much time, I would invite Ms. Payal Jain to share her her views, especially on the entire life cycle approach, and how does the sustainability aspect is taken into consideration starting from the very early stages of design. Ms. Jain, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shah. This has been a very, very educational session for me personally. So I want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you, Mr. Bagai. Thank you, Kartike Bhai, Juhi, Ms. Pavitra. I mean, you have sort of created this whole landscape that India is, the vast textile and craft heritage that we come from. So I'm not going to really talk about textile because there are great experts here. It's not my space. I will connect fashion and sustainability because that's what I do. I do believe, and I think we have a lot of students here, which is what I'm directing this presentation more towards. I think design is very important. When you start with the design, you have to think sustainability. So it is not something which comes later in the process, that when your product is ready, then you think, oh, how can I pitch it as being sustainable? It's also a word which I think is greatly misused today. People are selling anything and everything by saying it is organic, it is sustainable, it's good for the environment, it's good for the planet. How much of it is really true? And I don't know how much of it our audience, our customers really understand. Do they just see that tag? Do they see that line which says sustainable and buy it? Or do they want to educate themselves further on this? I do have a small presentation. The first part of it will link fashion with sustainability. And the second part of it is I wanted to actually take the students through how a collection from inspiration to completion starts keeping sustainability as the primary thought in your mind. Of course, design is part of it, but it has to start from the beginning. So may I share my screen, please? Okay. So I'll start with how, what most of us think of fashion. We know that fashion is one of the largest offenders of the climate. Most people buy their clothes and throw them away. 3, 4, 5 times is an average of when people throw away their clothes. We have so much wastage of energy, water in producing the garments, after the fabric is done, in producing garments, and then in maintaining them. And none of us think about it. It's very, it's sort of part of our process to just, use, wear, use, and throw and discard. And, as Indians, I think we are just very lucky to be born in India. And I'd like to especially say this to the students because the kind of culture and heritage we have, the kind of textile traditions which we have, which you have already heard from all these amazing speakers, I don't think any other country in the world has this. And if we are not going to use these traditions and not use these crafts to our advantage to make us different from the rest of the world, how will we be? What is the difference between a designer coming from India and a designer coming from anywhere else in the world? It is your textile heritage. It is something to be extremely proud of. It is something to experiment with. It is something to promote. And in the process, you are also promoting and helping the clusters, the artisans, these traditions, which are thousands of years old, as Juhi also mentioned, and which are at risk of becoming extinct very soon if we don't all jump into it and start taking it as our personal agenda. I think sustainability also has to be something which you intrinsically believe in. It has to be something which has to really hurt you personally. It has to hurt that this planet is being eroded, planet is being ruined, and we all need to take this as part of our agenda. Some of this is just basic facts. Average consumer buys 60% more clothes than they did a decade ago. 1/3 of the women wear clothes 5 times before throwing them out. Here, I would like to say that we as Indians are sustainable. That's who our forefathers were. That's who our past 20 generations were. They did not throw away anything. It was reused. It was either passed down to the next sibling or then made into cleaning fabrics or made into rags. It was never thrown away. Today, in what I call disposable fashion, which is largely really bad for the environment, you just wear wear twice, at the most thrice, and then you discard it and it sits somewhere. You don't even think where it's going to go. It is probably going to live beyond your and your children's lifespan. And that is something you need to think about when, as designers, if you are going to create collections and you're going to add to this footprint on the planet. Sorry, I'm not able to move. Yeah. So circularity, to me, is about is something which starts from the design stage. So when you are creating a fashion line, is when you need to start thinking: are these natural fabrics? How has the fabric been produced? So where was it spun? Where did the yarn come? Where was it woven? And then how did you end up with it? So of course you will need to go back a little bit. I'm not saying each one of you will be able to map out that process, but at least be mindful of the fabric that you're going to buy and that you are going to promote as a collection in your businesses going forward. What I think we need to do is design for recycling. So when we create a collection, we need to know what is going to happen after this collection is ready and what is going to happen after that. And 2 years, 5 years, 7 years down the line, when somebody come back to you with these garments, and can something else be made out of it? So does it have that longevity? And if it is a natural yarn, if it is woven by your weavers, if it has artisanal hand block print or vegetable dyes, chances are it will last long enough and you can reuse it, repurpose it. Also, you can recycle in design. So you can transform old fabrics or garments into something else to extend their lifespan. I think some of the opportunities we have in design and to make design circular is we need to design for the future. So we have to think beyond that particular garment, that beyond particular season, that trend, and that collection. We need to create designs which have a longer lifespan. We need to create with the intention that this can be repurposed and reinvented once its life cycle is over. And of course, today there is a lot of technology which has made it possible for us to be able to reuse and recycle and repurpose. So please explore that technology. Sustain and preserve what we have. Of course, that is our crafts, that's our textiles, that's our heritage that we as Indians are blessed with. To rethink and reinvent garments. And also the waste which comes out while you are making a collection, while you're making a garment, there's a lot of waste which comes out. Are you just going to throw that away and not think about what happens to it? Or can you reuse it? Can you make accessories out of it? Can you make home products out of it? Can you reuse that in the next collection? What are you doing with your waste? This is just some screenshots of yarn, of dyes, how it's being woven, just to set context of who we are as Indians and what we are celebrating. Some aspects of sustainability which I think are pertinent to every single garment which comes out, which a designer creates, is the production factor. How much water and energy are you wasting and consuming? Consuming is one aspect of it, wasting is another. When students or when young designers start their businesses, I don't think this is something they have the luxury to worry about. But as they get further into the process, as they understand who they are and what their labels and what their brands stand for, I think it is definitely something you have to be concerned about. Is there unmindful usage of water? Can you not recycle it? Can you not reuse it? Can you stop wasting that? Plastic is another thing I feel we, in the fashion as an industry, every garment, at least 10 years ago was packaged in plastic. Every garment that you shipped out was packaged in plastic. So if you start counting the number of plastic bags that you used every single month, even a small business, was mind-boggling. You didn't even think about it. The minute you change the usage of plastic, so today in my office and my factory, there is no usage of plastic, hasn't been for the last 7 or 8, 10 years. It was a difficult transition, but we have been able to manage it. Clients were not willing to accept things which we shipped in biodegradable bags. Over a period of time, I think everybody has understood. And so, it is something you have to almost enforce, and then the rest will follow. To be able to source sustainable raw materials, as Juhi took us through a lot of the sources which were even news to me. We are not using a lot of these treasures that we have in India. I mean, every state in the country offers something unique. Some unique textiles, some unique crafts, some unique heritage or traditions, which, I mean, I may have worked with maybe 10 states, but I can spend the rest of my life exploring this, and still there will be more to explore, and there will be more to use. I think, to me, sustainability is very cool. I think what we need to also understand is following a trend mindlessly. So you look at trend predictives, you look at online, you look at social media, you look at Bollywood, you look at Hollywood, look at influencers, and you follow that path. And it is not because you're following them that you're going to be cool. It is when you create your own language of fashion that you're going to be cool. Let minimum impacts to the environment drive your process. Social responsibility again, use of chemicals, dyes, washes, finishes. If you can stick with vegetable dyes, if you can stick with natural processes, that is ideal. And yes, believe me, they are as cool. There is a health risk for workers, even in your factories. India is very fragmented as far as the fashion and textile landscape is concerned. So not all production units are friendly for the people who are actually sitting and producing. It is not best for their health. The basic systems are not in place so when you start a small business, you don't think about all this because you have other fires to fight. You have bills to pay, you have people to pay. But these are things which are very, very important. And that's the reason I'm mentioning it, because all of these design students will go out there and will either go for jobs or will start their own businesses. And I think these are all concerns which need to remain in their forefront. Animal welfare, I mean, as a ethical policy, I do not use leather, have not used leather for years or fur. I'm not saying all of you need to do that, but I think there's so many alternates now that you really do not need to use leather. And they're as beautiful or better alternates through technology. Health and safety of your workforce, recycling whatever waste is coming out of your factories, your organizations, and then upcycling some of the old garments. So we all have old garments left. We have so much stock. Can we not recycle and repurpose them? Why do we need to put it on a sale and get rid of it? We can repurpose and give it a completely new dimension. Again, some screenshots to give you an idea of the kind of crafts that we work with. There's some hand block print. The center image is is products which we create out of our scrap. So it can be coasters, can be home, can be accessories. There's multiple things you can do with your scrap. Some more ideas of what you can work with and the extent of our textile heritage. Embroideries. Every state has something special to offer. Every state. I mean, I'm just amazed when I travel from one state to another. I mean, and many of these are really at risk of becoming extinct because they're not being passed down generations because it does not make sense for these families. For example, I work with chicken curry. And I remember when I started about 30 years ago, 29 years ago, there were lots of clusters. There were lots of women who would do the craft. And it's a women-centric craft. Through the years, they have not passed it to the next generation. There are very few young women who actually practice chicken curry, only because there are call centers, there's plenty of other options to earn money, and this does not pay enough. It is the most exquisite hand embroidery tradition, and it is just vanishing. We are left with a few captive clusters which we work with, but there are no young people in them. They are all, they are 50 plus segment of women who still are passionate about the craft, and that's why they continue it, not necessarily because it makes sense from a monetary point of view. We do try to support these clusters through the year and more, but it is still a very fast vanishing craft. These are some of the ideas which I think you can use for your scrap. So we use all our scrap, which comes out of different collections, into home products or hair products or Christmas decorations. So many things you can do with it. Also, we work with clusters which are then trained to create this. So it's a double advantage, so to say, because these clusters get the livelihood. They're trained to make, to stitch, to produce products, plus they're able to earn an income from it. These are some examples of past collections where you'll see on the left this chicken curry, traditional chicken curry, but just in a modern interpretation. The center one is also a hand embroidery. The right is again chicken curry. It's how, you know, fashion and sustainability and Indian craft can be cool, being sustainable. And this is all natural fabric. It's all natural silk yarn, silk georgette. This is some more examples. You will not recognize that on the right top corner is a bandhani done on a munga silk, which we have converted into a jacket. The middle one is again chicken curry, but done in a more modern way. As Pravitra ji mentioned, it's about taking the craft and just twisting it a little bit to make it more contemporary, and then make, you know, fashionable, cool garments out of it. The bottom is zardozi. On the left is a lot of applique work with mirror work, which you're not seeing. On the right is again zardozi with a lot of dabka. So some R's of circularity: rethink, reduce, reuse, repair, refurbish, recover, and recycle. I think this has to be part of your ethos, part of what your brand stands for, and your brand is who you are. So it's an extension of your personality. So if you believe in doing your little bit for the planet, for the environment, which is going to be still there and only there for you and your children and their children. So I think we all have to jump in and say, you know, this is what I believe in, and that's why I'm doing this. It's not because it's another tag on social media. It's not because I can talk about how my product was made, how sustainable it was, but because I believe in it. I don't know if I have the time, Dr. Shah, for the second part of it, which was really the life cycle, and I can end here if you like.
Yes, I think because let's have some of that maybe in the question answer session if we can deal, so that it would be easier for me to be on time.
Okay,
so
sure.
If that's okay. Yeah.
Thank you
so much. Thank you. It was really interesting to know how sustainability aspects you are looking at, and the entire that our concept and several other aspects. How do you use the natural thing? So may I now request our next panelist, Ms. Ritu Sethi. Rituji has been associated with the craft sector since a long, and she is an editor of the Global Link, which is an online international journal of intangible cultural heritage. She has been on the advisory committee of several institutions who work on the handicraft and handlooms. She is a founder trustee of Craft Revival Trust and has authored several She is also a part of this whole documentation that we are doing currently, and she has been part of curating team that works towards editing the entire compilation, and that she is working with UNEP. So may I welcome Ms. Ritu Sethi and hand it over to you, ma'am, to discuss about your views on how work on reviving the handloom tradition. Over to you, Rituji. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Janki, and thank you, CEE and UNEP, for including me in this panel. As I've got exactly 10 minutes, so in this time, I'm going to talk about the topic of sustainable textiles and leveraging the learning from slightly different perspective. Delhi pollution. As textile making is a living tradition, to ensure its sustainable future, it is imperative that we be alert to its health. And towards this, I have put together a gauge by which the viability of the practice and its transmission can be determined, while allowing for timely assessment for vulnerability. I'm going to read out my paper. It's brief and I hope to finish in 10 minutes. But before I start, I want to add a rider that given the wide diversity of textile crafts and the varied circumstances and the nature of its practice, and the host of mitigating factors that can threaten viability, this evaluation criteria that has been put together is by necessity very generalized in nature so as to be applied across the board. Therefore, a supplementary benchmarking metric tailored to individual crafts and craft genres may need to be added on in a phase 2 evaluation that supplements this general criteria. This would then take into consideration the nuances of practice to deepen the investigation before the initiation of any safeguarding to consolidate and strengthen transmission and practice. As a starting point, I looked at existing definitions. In India, in the Office of the Development Commissioner Handicrafts in the Ministry of Textiles, under whose jurisdiction several textile crafts fall, issued an official definition of languishing or endangered textiles in 2009-10, which I quote, definition of endangered, earlier called languishing crafts. Point 1, the total number of craftspersons are less than 25. Point 2, craftspersons have replaced craft activity with any other activity because the craft practice is unviable, and or if reduction in time spent on the particular craft is more than 50% in the last 3 years. Point 3, next generation in the family is not learning the craft, and there is no recruitment of new persons outside the family, and or percentage of new recruits is less than 40%. For the handlooms, while there is no set definition of endangered, there is the Handloom Reservation Act of 1985. This actually, the Handloom Reservation Act is right from 1950, but it has gone through many permutations and combinations, and the act was changed again in 1985. And this lays out the perceived threat to production and lists the various varieties of weaves and products that come under its purview. While this is a good starting point, given the vast nature of the segment and the degrees of vulnerabilities, further research led me to the Handicraft Association, Craft Association of the UK, that in 2017 developed a red list that identified and classified all crafts, including textile crafts, according to their endangered status. Here, the risk assessment was in 4 categories that determined the threat to viability of a craft. In descending order, the craft categories extended from extinct crafts, critically endangered crafts, to endangered crafts, with an additional category described as data deficient. That is defined as those crafts for which there is insufficient data to make a status classification. And a craft is considered viable when there were sufficient craftspeople who could transmit their skill to the next generation of practitioners. Of course, unlike in our country, the practitioners could come from any class, caste, strata of society. Based on these definitions and based on field research and learnings, we at Craft Revival Trust developed a continuum of, or a gauge of 6+1, which in phase 1 could be used to decide what the viability of textile crafts and other crafts can be gauged on. So these 6+1 categories are as follows. The first is defined as viable, dynamic, robust. where there are sufficient number of masters who can transmit craft skills to the increasing number of new entrants. There is a robust nature of engagement with existing and new patrons and an increasing demand for products. The second category is maintenance, where the number of craftspeople has not grown. New entrants have replaced the old, but the total number remains static. The nature of engagement with new and existing patrons is stable, and the market share is static. And here, there is a definite risk of the crafts in this category falling into the unsafe/vulnerable category, which is the third category, unsafe/vulnerable. Here, intergenerational transmission is low, with a trickle of new entrants. Market share is on the decline, as is the nature of engagement with patrons. There is a definite risk of the craft falling into the next category, which is endangered. The fourth category is definitely endangered, where intergenerational transmission is barely existent. Engagement with patrons is on a steady decline, and there's a definite risk of the craft being no longer practiced. Fifth is the critically endangered, where the shrinking base of practitioners is limited to aged makers. There is no intergenerational transmission or any new entrants. There is barely any engagement with patrons, and there is a definite risk of this craft becoming extinct, which is the sixth category, extinct. The craft is no longer practiced. And the 6+1 on the gauge is data deficient. This category has been borrowed from and we have learned from the Heritage Craft Association of the UK. And though it's not on the continuum, which is why it is labeled as 6+1, this is a valuable addition for us in the Indian context, as there is a lack of data, both census, diagnostic reports, and others, both in numbers in practice and on specific crafts. And this is defined as and can include crafts that for which information is not provided, where we have no data on numbers, there is no knowledge base existence, or crafts which are very local and the information is hard to come by. After establishing the degree of viability through this phase 1 process, we would recommend that a second level of phase 2 be gone into, which will entail an in-depth process of researching the evident and tacit causes for endangerment for each individual craft that has been so labeled, which will allow for tailored safeguarding measures that are entirely suitable for the particular craft in focus. In both phase 1 and phase 2, it is strongly recommended that participation and involvement of the community of practitioners and transmitters be fundamental to the process, that it's not a top-down approach, but involves all stakeholders in the ecosystem. In addition, I would add that the question of whether safeguarding is warranted for certain endangered crafts needs to be deliberated on with the community, especially as crafts as lived practices are constantly evolving and have often been a response to cultural, economic, or social needs. So in the case of some practices, they may be considered to be obsolescent or archaic or not in keeping with current legislation or human rights, or that they may have fulfilled their functionality. So there is need to assess the necessity for revitalization and safeguarding. So in conclusion, safeguarding in times of change needs top priority. And as we emerge from COVID-19, we are no longer sure of the many certainties we took for granted as more crafts and craftspeople emerge into a vulnerable future. And there is urgent need to assess the current viability of a wide swath of traditional crafts, including the textile crafts, and identify those that are most endangered and indeed at risk of becoming extinct. The Office of the DC Handicrafts formulated in 2000, when they formulated their definition of languishing, now called endangered textiles, they formulated a list of 35 crafts on this endangered list, of which includes 8 textile crafts. And while DC Handlooms does not have a formal definition, they have a list of 26 textile crafts that are on the endangered list. This is an important benchmarking list as it determines which crafts benefit from priority government support. However, these lists were formulated some time ago, and it is important to review them biannually to assess whether the measures or the effectiveness of safeguarding procedures that have been initiated are working, and to course correct, perhaps to remove them from the list because they have been on for some time, and add on new crafts. Moving on from these 2 lists, plus those made by civil society, by design institutes, etc., a fresh mapping of textile crafts is now essential, especially, like I said, as we emerge from COVID-19. And to gauge their vulnerability is of utmost priority, as this focus could bring a heightened awareness to threatened crafts and perhaps lead to creative solutions, partnerships, and attention to sustainability. By instituting a long-term viability monitoring plan, while assessing the effectiveness of sustainability measures, the cultural loss that is borne each time a craft, a textile craft, or any other dies can be alleviated, and the craft be stewarded into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rituji. Thank you for this different perspective and definitions and understanding of the entire handloom, how it is looked into when you look into the formal and legal terms. So now, can we open this session for the question answers? We already have a couple of questions in the Q&A box. I think all the panelists also have the access to that, but just to begin with, there's a question from Sanskriti Menon. Shares, I think this is the early presentation of Ms. Juhi Pandey, but others can also answer, respond wherever they want, but basically asking about is the reviving local breeds can be a way of building climate resilience, and does that connects with lively livestock and livelihood connected with them? So please. Juhiji, if you want to.
Do you want me to respond to the question?
Yes.
Okay. So definitely what we have seen in and also learned from the practitioners and say specifically here where you're talking about local breeds, the pastoralists, is that there is a very strong correlation between the local indigenous breeds to the aspect of climate resilience. I have personally, when we have worked with the pastoralists, there have been data, there have been conversations and stories been told that when we used to go into these fields at one point of time, our sheep could get this particular grass to eat, which helped them with their stomach issues, but now the grass is not available, and hence even the number of diseases in our sheep are increasing. So there are all these correlations that are there, which are completely in tandem with all the impact that's loss of local breeds, indigenous plants, indigenous seeds is happening towards the climate aspect. So there is a very, very big correlation, and there is you do need our indigenous plants, our indigenous seeds, and our indigenous animals to be around in that particular ecosystem to maintain and keep a balance of ecology. I'm not an ecological expert in it, so I can't add data, but what we have seen is that the livelihoods are connected. Till local wool was a primary fiber or a fiber that was being utilized by the weavers and the spinners in the region, specifically when I'm talking about Kutch. There was the need for them to keep those breeds alive. When those fibers were of no use, or the weavers started getting industrially made, easily made merino yarn, or when it comes to wool, etc., the demand reduced on for the breeders to keep breeds of sheep which were for wool, and they shifted to raising sheep which were for meat. And they themselves now, because the demand is so less, and this is way back in 2017 when we were on the field, we've heard shepherds tell us that now we wish, because they had to shear the sheep because you need to do it for the health of the sheep. So they would shear the wool, but they would just chuck it. And they were like, we'd hope that we can actually find a breed of sheep where we just rub our hands on the body and the wool just goes off, because they were not even finding shearers. So there are all these aspects that are very much interconnected to their life and livelihoods and the keeping of livestock. So there is a relationship, and there is a need for us to maintain our local breeds to keep even the climate aspects in balance. I hope I've answered your question, Sanskruti.
Can I come in a minute for this?
Yes, please. Yes,
so
yes, absolutely.
In the Deccani sheep where we work in Karnataka, they too have the same problem, that there is no land left for grazing. So what happens is the pastoralists had exercise because they grazed them in different lands, and the sheep also ate different kind of grasses, so they were healthier and the hair was longer. Today, because the breeds are getting mixed, we have hair that is very short. So while it becomes very difficult to weave hair with this short, okay, so then that means they have to put more glue. Their glue that they use is the tamarind seed paste. So in the community, they don't use any chemical. The glue is made out of tamarind seed paste. And so they have to coat it as a thicker coat to keep the sheep hair together to spin it. And since they all do thigh reeling, it takes a long effort. So we're trying to look if we can do some other permutations and combinations. And the issue about this breed is they asked me a very pertinent question, a pastoralist. He says, did God make them to stay in one place in a fence? They're meant to walk. So we have interfered with God's ways, and that's why we are suffering for all these kind of things. He says, you keep a man in one place, is his output good? Similarly with the sheep, is a cheeky question they ask me. Thank you.
Thank you. Another quick question that is from Rochelle Mense, asking about when we talk of sustainability of textiles, how to ensure that the tribal groups who are moving away from this traditional livelihoods, what kind of sustenance can be given to them to ensure the sustainability of their craft and continuing the traditional livelihood? Any panelist, in a quick minute or so, if we can respond to this question.
If I can come in, I think the idea is you have to keep the core of their craft, but you have to innovate it and use design thinking to move forward. That's the only way. If you can get a commercial value from their craft and their tradition and their skill without losing that essence and creating something that will create economic success, I think that's the way forward for it. You cannot demean what they have, or you cannot put them down. It's very important to keep them at the center of all your interventions, and that I think is very important, to value and respect their skill and commercialize it with minimal interventions. You cannot change the whole look of it. It should be minimal so that it retains its originality also.
Thank you for that. Two questions I'll just sum up, putting together. One is about the quantum of production, whether it matches the need of the consumption. So the question is, if the quantum of production of sustainable textile matches, can it match the tremendous consumption? Or if they're not, then how does that affect the pricing? And also a question which says, are there any joint forums between synthetic textile sector and the natural and sustainable textile sector? Anyone can, it's an open question if any panelist or any speaker want to respond to that.
In on all these questions, but I don't think, see, the first thing is coming into this point of it is with the natural fiber and the synthetic fiber, they'll always go into landfills. Whereas natural fibers, whether it's cotton, silk, jute, banana, any kind of plant fiber can be woven. So the potential is immense. The volume will never match what comes out of a machine. But I think, isn't that what slow fashion is about? So it fits the bill, and textiles has most of the SDG goals. I mean, there's no reverse migration. You can, all these kind of things, you can work from your home and be creative. Colors are very soothing and therapeutic. And the whole process of weaving itself is very therapeutic, So I don't think we could even look. The problem is we compare it with mill-made things. That's the problem. And it also comes down to the policy. The government has given so much of focus for machine made that now we are struggling to keep the handmade again there. And if we had stuck to what the original policy was about reservation for the Handloom Reservation Act, we wouldn't be in such states where most of the weavers' children are living weaving. But unless you show them it's economically viable, they don't need to be weavers. A weaver's son doesn't need to be a weaver, but he knows the craft. He can be a businessman. And so I think that is also acceptable. Every weaver's son doesn't need to be a weaver. Our children don't need to be, I mean, just like they are aspirational, everybody's kids are aspirational. As long as they have an idea about the craft, they will preserve it and go ahead. But synthetics is a major problem. I mean, when we have fibers from every possible plant, I don't know why we need synthetics.
I may add here also, I think the comparison between the synthetic and the natural is, it's sort of unfair. I mean, how can you compare? You cannot compare the two. And if you are going to buy the fast fashion, the synthetic, then you're really not somebody who's thinking it through or wanting the natural. But if you're going to go the natural way, you will never buy synthetic. So I don't, in my head, there is no comparison between the two. And a lot of people, a lot of times students ask me that, is the life of something natural longer than something which is synthetic? And I think absolutely so, because it can be reinvented, repurposed, whereas a synthetic, it is what it is, and it is going to sit in a landfill.
Thank you so much for your remarks and responses. Now may I request Professor Chatterjee, he is already here to say his remarks and his points, basically taking the overall discussion and his concluding remark. Professor Chatterjee, if I can briefly, I mean, he needs no introduction, but if I can briefly introduce, he has been in the textile sector, in this handicraft and handloom sector for a very long time. He has been working with National Institute of Design as executive director and as a senior faculty and distinguished fellow. He is honored president of Craft Council of India and he's authored several publications. And he's also working very closely, mentoring this entire publication process that he is working with UNEP. So over to you, sir. Professor Ashok Chatterjee, over to you, sir. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, because my Zoom has collapsed and I'm trying to connect on the phone. And there are all kinds of problems here. Anyway, I just like to say that this discussion has been extremely useful. It indicates in many ways the importance of the project which we are now doing on the documentation of India's handloom traditions in the context of a sustainable future. I think it's important to point out that what we are doing in this publication on handlooms really stands for the whole handmade sector. We are concentrating on handlooms. That in itself is a universe of its own. But the lessons that come out of this exercise apply to a much larger sector of our national economy, as well as our hopes and aspirations for a sustainable future. In this connection, I think it's important in the context of what we've just heard in the last few questions, that we go back to what Mr. Bagai brought up this morning about individual consumer behaviors. Ultimately, it's the consumer who will decide whether this effort works or does not work. And we have to address the kind of aspirations that today's consumers have, particularly the younger generation of today and tomorrow. So basically, we need to perhaps also remember that from the time of the freedom movement in India, the handmade, including the handloom, was part of the way India understood the process of transition from a traditional society to a modern society. It was not rejecting the handmade culture, it was bringing that handmade culture into the center of our understanding of modernity. And that, I think, is important to keep in mind when we're talking about how to create the kind of awareness on which all our efforts depend. And here the observation that Karthikeya made is so important, that this subcontinent, not just India, but all the countries on this subcontinent, are the only example in this globe, on this globe, of an unbroken tradition of handmade cultures going back over 5,000 to 6,000 years. Nowhere else has this tradition remained unbroken. But we are in great risk of breaking that for all the reasons that we have heard today. And one of those, I think, came up very clearly in the presentation that Juhi made about how the links with the pastoral and tribal communities is so essential to our understanding of both sustainability as well as the lifestyles to which we all aspire. I think here the VMOR intervention by Viditra is extremely important because, as she mentioned, at the heart of all of this is putting food on the table. And that process we want to do, keeping the integrity of tradition intact. There are no simple answers about how that integrity can be guaranteed, but it certainly means that at the heart of all this effort is the need to understand the marketing context of the sustainability challenge. marketing not understood as selling, but marketing as understanding a user's need and satisfying that need at a profit to both the artisan and to all the others in the distribution chain. And I think there, the observation that was made by Payal Jain on the misunderstandings that surround this word sustainability need to be addressed. For example, she brought up the importance of packaging. Now, in the entire consumer goods industry, this is an issue. So when we are talking about the handmade, we also need to understand this ecosystem of which the handmade is a part, and of all the partners that we need in order that our message of sustainability and our practices of sustainability are also sustained in the future. The point that Ritu Sethi has brought to our attention is extremely critical. She talks about the need for a fresh mapping, which will take into account the lessons we have learned from the COVID pandemic. Those lessons have been huge, and there's not time just now to discuss them, but they are a warning that disaster management must be one of the capacities we develop within the sector, because human-made and natural disasters seem to be around the corner, and the pandemic was a mixture of both. So how do we develop these red lists which indicate where the need for attention should be focused? I think this is an extremely important contribution which CRT is making. I hope we can keep that in mind when we are doing this particular document. I'm not sure if we have this aspect in the document now, Ritu, but we should make sure that it is in there.
We actually do, because when we discuss the crafts, Madhura Datta, who's compiling the whole list together, she is putting in all these details also. So it is there on the sustainability and what is impacting each textile craft. So,
and I think as a
it will come to notice. Yeah.
As a backdrop to this, we should keep in mind what came up just now in the question and answer. I think it was Pavitra who mentioned it, the Sustainable Development Goals. When we started our struggle to try and get attention to the hand industry, we did not have the Sustainable Development Goals as a backdrop, as a platform, and in fact, as a ground on which to stand. Now we have that. If you look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the handmade sector addresses at least 12 of those goals directly. And that is an advantage we have in our struggle for advocacy. That struggle is absolutely huge, because with all the rhetoric and all the talk and all the lectures about our ancient culture, when push comes to shove, there is very little serious attention to this sector and very little serious investment in this sector. Our efforts just now are towards some kind of change in that dismal scenario. There should be no excuse for a country like India, which has this unbroken tradition, which has this heritage not just of thousands of years, but of what happened during the freedom movement and how crafts moved into the development scenario immediately after the freedom movement, thanks to the visionaries like Jawaharlal Nehru, Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay, Pupul Jayakar, and others. We have that huge advantage and that learning which we can share with the rest of the world. And those learnings integrate wonderfully with the Sustainable Development Goals. But the tragedy is that today, when India reports to the United Nations on its progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, it does not look at the craft sector. It does not look to the craft sector. It does not report what the craft sector is doing, because the data does not exist. And as some of you know, a group of us have been struggling now for more than 1 decade to try and get the government of India to establish a reliable database for handmade in India. Unless we have that reliable database, these suggestions that have been made today on sustainability are going to be very difficult to implement, because every one of those recommendations requires an awareness of the sector and it requires data for the sector. So these are other debates that we need to discuss and we need to continue. But I think it's extremely useful that we've had this discussion. I do hope this discussion can be recorded or summarized and shared, particularly with all the young people who today are seeking careers in the handmade sector, including handlooms, but not restricted to handlooms, because this will be a learning that will be extremely valuable for all of them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your concluding remarks. Right now we are ending, approaching towards the concluding part of the webinar. May I now request if any of the panelists wants to make any final comments or a liner before we conclude, or Kartikeya bhai, do you want to come in and share some of your feedback and opinions about the remarks on this? Or I don't
Just
why, but yeah.
Just to share what Ashok said just now, that this will be a very good resource, and Ashok, this will be available online for people to look at and see. I think a number of very good points have come. I thought also Archana Datta, if she wants to make a comment, or anyone else. I think we've talked about two related things. One is, of course, the tradition itself, whether the tradition will stay alive. And we are also talking about the ecosystem which supports that tradition, and the tradition supports that ecosystem. And how do you keep that alive? Because as several speakers spoke, you cannot have a certain tradition if the fiber is not available or the dye is not available. How do you keep this whole thing going in an unbroken tradition which is currently threatened? But Archana, maybe you could just say a word, because you haven't said anything.
No, thank you, Kartik bhai. And I don't think I am experienced enough to talk in front of such stalwarts who have been taking this initiative forward. I think in terms of taking the work forward from UNEP side, this is something that we are trying to align with our global strategy and the work that we are doing in our global teams who are based in Paris. So rest assured that we will take this work forward, and we will talk about it at all the relevant forums going forward. But yeah, this is it from my side. I don't think I can add any other thing to the discussion given my expertise and my experience at this stage. Thank you. But it was wonderful listening to all of the experts here.
Would all the panelists like to have a final, just a quick comment before we end? Kyle, would you like to say something?
I just hope this will create more synergies between designers and textile designers. Fashion designers are kind of like an outcast, because we just, that's how everybody treats them, because we're just the social page 3 people and we don't have the depth. But that is not necessarily true. So, if fashion designers could work with textile designers, I think some of this could change, because eventually we do understand what the market wants. And we do, we understand the dynamics of it and the costs of it and how to work backwards. So I hope this will create synergies between our Fashion Design Council, which I couldn't mention, which is about a few thousand young designers now, and with UNEP and CEE. If there were some future endeavors we could do, we have lots of students interested, lots of young designers who have just started their businesses. It would be tremendous value to listen to all of you and understand the background of textile, because we just think of the garment, we don't think of the back end. And I think that's, that's the part you're all bringing here. Thank you for having me here. Thank you.
Thank you. Pavitra ji, I know you're catching a flight, but if you are...
Yeah, I think if you could do something to do with the policy, I think it would be great, because then the weavers not at the receiving end, pandemic, he was just given 2,000 rupees a whole year. So per day it comes to 5 rupees 47 paisa. And it was so painful for me to answer these questions of what is sustenance at 5 rupees 47 paisa a day. That is the tragedy. I mean, I think policy really needs to be worked on, to see, I mean, we can pay everyone more. Why does a weaver get so little? That's the question. I hope you'd address it.
Yeah, thank you. Rituji, would you like to say something?
I've heard everyone, and there is so much food for thought. And like everyone has said, if we have synergy, our voices get heard wider rather than individual voices speaking. I like what Payal said also. At the end, tradition is modern. And what is modern now and what appeals to the young is fashion. So it's so important to work with fashion designers to make statements in different forums. So while we work in our silos, this is a very important silo to address also. So, I think the panel has been put together so thoughtfully that we got information from all these different levels. So let's see what we do next.
Thank you. And Juhi, last word from you.
So there are 2 points. I think what Rituji has mentioned, we really need to work towards the documentation. And I know AC has also been through the Crafts Council doing this for the last 10 years. It's a very, very important aspect, even before policy, for us to have the data to let the world know this is where we are. And with the FDCI and what Payal mentioned, I think we also need to go one step lower into the education system and start having these conversations and dialogues come into the curriculum of fashion design students, textile design students, and hence start inculcating that the thought process or the thinking process from the inception of the design field or the conservation field. So thank you so much. It was brilliant, everything that has been spoken today.
Kartik bhai, if I can quickly add to what Juhi and Payal just mentioned, UNEP is also working with NIFT on developing curriculum on sustainable fashion. So in fact, we started last year where we offered a general elective course on sustainable and circular textiles to the students who are taking up degree courses in NIFT. This year we have tied up again. We offered 2 MDPs, Management Development Program for professionals, and we are now finalizing curriculum for a 1-year diploma on sustainable fashion. So that is something that we've already started work on, and we'll be happy to share more details with whosoever wants to seek a collaboration with NIFT or with UNEP on this initiative. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Janki. Last word from you just to close it.
Thank you, everyone. Everyone, this has been really a wonderful experience. I think all the perspectives that came from various angles, starting from ecosystem perspective, like beginning from the fiber till the finished product, and the end result and recycling. I think it has been a wonderful session. I take this opportunity to thank you everyone, all the panelists who are extremely busy in the tight schedules, like Pavitra ji was about to, she has been about to fly, Pajan was also extremely busy. So is for the Rituji and Ashokji and everyone else. So thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule and coming together for this dialogue. On behalf of CE and UNEP, I'm extremely thankful to all of you and also all the participants who have been part of this interesting dialogue. And we look forward to more such avenues and ways in which this kind of discussions can continue, and a lot of these recommendations we can interview and look into when we are working on the documentation that we are creating. Thank you so much, Ashna ji and Pavitra, for your constant input to this whole entire process and guidance from Mr. Gaiser and Kartik bhai and everyone else. Thank you so much.
Janki,
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Ashokji was saying
Ashok
something.
wants to just say something.
I
Yes,
just
please.
want to say that I think we should include a summary of today's discussion in the documentation we are doing for UNEP. It would be a good way to bring this together because a lot of insights have come up today. We could have this as a brief part of our documentation.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Namaste.
Thank you so much. Namaste.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.